Hello guys, my name is Raza Masood. Today we will discuss what is difference between constraints and assumptions. Guys, today's topic is very interesting and it's basically pertaining to the project management or PMI, project management body of knowledge or PMBOK. So let's start our topic. What is basically difference between constraints and assumption? So first we will see the definition of constraint. What is basically a constraint? Constraints are factors that limit the team's options, such as limit on resources, budget, schedule, and scope. Friends, just imagine constraint as something like some limits, limits that you can't go beyond that limits. For example of constraint is that you have to complete the project with 5 resources. That means you cannot increase resources more than 5. You must have to do the project with 5 resources. You have to complete the project with a budget of $10,000. It cannot be increased with this limit. If it increase, you have to change the management plan or you have to change the budget. So similarly, schedule, you must have to complete the project within 2 months. It can't be increased more than 2 months. You have to complete the project with 5 modules of project. No more six module or any other module can be added in the scope. So guys, these are the types of constraints, and you have to consider. Just remember this type of figure, this type of concept in your mind, that constraint is basically a limit or boundary that you cannot cross. That boundary you must have to play, you must have to work within that boundary. You cannot go beyond that boundary. So what is constraint? Constraints are the limits in which you have to work, and limits pertaining to resources, budget, schedule, scope, something like that pertaining to a project. So this is called a constraints. Now coming towards the assumptions, what is basically an assumption? Guys, assumptions are things that are assumed to be true which may not be true. This is very interesting definition. What does that mean? Basically when we are doing project, we have to assume few things that which may not be true, but we have to do the assumption. For example, uh, you are doing a project and you assume that you don't need to take approval from the engineering department. So you assume this thing. So this assumption can be true or cannot be true. This is better that you take confirmation, but to somehow you have to take some assumptions. You assume that when you go on site, the internet connection would be available. You assume that when you go at bank side, the IT infrastructure would be available, like laptops and hardware, other things would be available. You assume. So guys, just remember that assumptions are the things that are assumed to be true which may not be true. Similar, so this is the basic definition of assumption. You assume that the bank will provide you the internet connection to do the project. You assume that the resources would be available at 9 o'clock. So these are all these sorts of things are assumptions which can be true or may not be true. Just remember one thing, that assumption and these sorts of things are basically identified. Assumption and constraints are identified by sponsor, stakeholders, project manager, project team at the starting of a project, and they are identifying the things throughout the project, like initiating or throughout the project. So if there is any change in the constraint or assumption, the project management plan and the schedule may change if there is any change in the constraint and assumption. So thank you, and that's all from my side. Thanks a lot for your